Okay, folks, today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. And the quadratic formula is a way to evaluate a quadratic equation. Should kind of seem more self-evident. Quadratic formula, quadratic equation. And we're going to first get into where does the quadratic formula come from. Alright, so the quadratic formula begins like this. Many of you have probably already seen it, particularly if you've gone through college algebra, which if you did not test out of it, you did. And it looks like this, where A, B, and C are all from the quadratic equation. AX squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Alright. And so it's a quick and easy way to find the solutions to x. Alright. And just kind of go ahead and color code this. You know, we have our A here and A there. This B is this B here and here. And the C is here. Oh, missed that A. Alright, so note what I highlighted and note what I did not highlight. I highlighted the letters A, B, and C. Note I did not highlight the entire term A times x squared. It's because you do not include that in with this formula. If you plug that in, you will get a wrong answer. Now, when I am hand grading tests, if I don't give this warning to people, I always see the following result. I will see people put in negative b times x plus or minus the square root of bx, quantity squared, minus 4 times ax squared times the c, let's see, just the c, and divide it by 2 times ax squared. I'll see something like this. Of course, you know, instead of the letters A, B, and C, I'll see numbers. And if this looks like garbage to you, it's because it is garbage. Make sure that when you use the quadratic formula, you only use the letter in front of the x. The only place that x should appear is on the left-hand side of the equation. If you have x appearing anywhere in here, you have done something awfully wrong. So make sure when you use the quadratic formula, you only use x on the left-hand side of the equation. And they'll usually have, x equals that. It's total garbage. Don't do this. This is awful, terrible. Don't do it. All right. So before we work any examples, let's go over where the quadratic formula comes from. The quadratic formula comes from completing the square. And I want you guys to follow along very closely, because if you understand where this comes from, you will understand the formula that much better. Alright, so we're going to start off with the quadratic formula, and we're just going to complete the square, but we're going to keep everything in the most general form possible. Before we redefine constants, just to so we can see how the numbers work, we're not going to redefine any constants. We're just going to run through this. Alright, so the first thing we did is we divide by a, right? Remember, that's what we do with completing the square. We divide by a. So when you divide by a, we get x squared plus b divided by a times x plus c divided by a, and that equals 0. Alright, remember that was the first step. Whereas before we would have redefined b over a and everything. We're not doing that. Next thing we got to do is we got to move this guy over there, and so we subtract c over a from both sides. So we have x squared plus b divided by a times x equals negative c divided by a. Now, Remember last time we took a look at this number. We had to know what was going on. We multiplied and divided by 2. So we have a 2 here and a 2 there. Alright, so this is going to simplify down to x squared plus 2 times b divided by 2a times x, and this equals negative c over a. All we did here is we just rewrote this term. Alright, so now note, when we're completing the square, this was the number, the square of that number was what we had to add to both sides to make this thing work. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to say plus b divided by 2a quantity squared, and then we add it to this side, b divided by 2a quantity squared. Let me go ahead and change the color so it's, or you know what, I'm going to go highlight it in green. Don't confuse this green highlight with the highlight up above. This is just to be consistent from when we were completing the square. Okay. So note, we can rewrite the left-hand side as x plus something squared equals, and I'll go ahead and expound that one so that we have b squared over 4a squared minus c divided by a. And what do I put in this green spot? But b divided by 2a. Alright, so let's do something else over here. Look at this number. We want this to have a common denominator with this guy here. So we're going to multiply top and bottom of this guy by 4 times a. Like so. Okay, so let's work this a little bit more. We've got b squared minus 4ac all divided by 4a squared. Okay. If you don't quite see that arithmetic, hit the pause button, kind of go through the steps, make sure it makes sense. Alright, so here's where we are. Now we take the square root of both sides, like so. Don't forget your plus or minus. So that on this next part, now drop the square root on the left-hand side. I'm sorry, yeah, square root and the square. And that equals positive or negative square root of b squared minus 4ac. And note, the square root of this guy right here is simply 2a. So that's what we put downstairs there, 2a. Alright, now all we got to do, move that guy over so that we have x equals negative b divided by 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Note these guys already have a common denominator. So let's go ahead and combine them so that we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. And there it is, end of proof. This is our quadratic formula. Okay, so now you've gone through where the quadratic formula comes from. I encourage you to go over this a couple of times, make sure it makes sense to you. And as I've said before, if you go through this a couple of times, where the quadratic formula comes from will make a lot more sense. and you'll also be able to understand completing the square a little bit better if you go over this a couple of times. Okay, so let's do a quick example of using this one. So let's start with the example. 2x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0. And we're going to use the quadratic formula here. So we'd say x equals, and let's go ahead. And we're going to go ahead and color code this real fast. That's our a. A goes here and here. That's our b. B goes here and here. And here is our c. And c goes right there. Again, please note that we are only including the number in front of the x, not including x itself. Alright, so x equals, we'll go ahead and put everything, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. So the number goes here and here. Green is here. And, oh, sorry. Put the wrong highlight there. And then C goes here. Alright, and so let's go ahead and fill this through. Positive 3, positive 2, positive 1, positive 2. Alright, so everything looks fine here. Let's go ahead and solve this one. And we have a negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 8, all divided by 4. And so we, of course, we end up with negative 3 plus or minus 1 divided by 4, which grants us, first we subtract the 1, so we have a negative 4 divided by 4, and then we add the 1, negative 2 divided by 4, which of course reduces down to negative 1 and a negative 1/2. And if you plug both of these guys into the original equation, you will get the left-hand side equaling to 0, as we expect it to. Okay, so in this video we went over where the quadratic formula comes from. It comes from completing the square. And then after we derived the formula, we worked out an example. Go ahead and try some of these on your own. Apply the quadratic formula to some of the examples we worked on previously. And email me if you have any questions on this or the homework. Good day.